Looking to throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion.
Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there.
Touchdown. Touchdown, Carolina.
The pistol. Jackson behind him.
Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win.
And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it. 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys. And if you joined us on our last stream, I do apologize. We did have some technical difficulties there, so we're going to run it back. We're going to give you everything that you need to know. I'm at the house now, so it should be a little bit easier. Don't usually like doing the driving ones, but there's just so much going on right now, guys. We got the NCAA tournament, Carolina, of course, in it, getting ready to play later on tonight. So that means a big day on the podcast side of things for the Four Corners tomorrow. And so did want to get this out to you guys, talk about the commitments that Carolina has landed, including a massive one last night in a multitude of different ways in the 2026 class, and one that is going to have some influence, it feels like, on the rest of that class, especially in the state of North Carolina. So we'll get to that, but two other commitments that Carolina has had since that visit weekend that they had back on March 8th. That has really paid dividends for Carolina. And there's a couple other guys who, since that time, have announced their official visit dates. We'll talk a little bit about that. And we also have another guy that has Carolina in his top schools list and does have the official visit dates for him as well. So Carolina with a lot of stuff going on right now on the 2025 and 2026 recruiting trail. So let's jump right into it. Again, this will be, more of a shorter edition of the podcast, but still definitely think that you guys will enjoy this as we take you through this group that Carolina landed. It starts with David Jackson in the 2026 recruiting class. He is an unranked defensive lineman. I believe to this point is still unranked. Going to try to check it here real quick while I'm talking to you guys, but definitely a guy that I think still has a lot of talent. May not be talked about as much as some of the other guys in this class, at least as of right now. But I do think that really, he's going to complement what Carolina already has. At this point, yes, still unranked if you go off of 24/7 Sports composite rankings. It is not 24/7 itself that does not have him ranked. I'm not sure which one of the major sites doesn't have him ranked to this point. But I mean, a 6'3" or 6'2", 285-pound man in the middle of this defensive line group. You can tell by that size just what type of player you would expect him to be, because the guys that are usually on the thinner side are going to be guys that get after the quarterback. And that's what he does. His suddenness, off the line of scrimmage makes him difficult to stay in front of, especially for offensive guards. And he brings powerful hands as well, which show up on tape. Very impactful player with how quickly he gets off the line of scrimmage, and the way that he can beat offensive guards across their face. Also, in general, just a guy that does a great job of getting off of blocks and making plays. And we've talked so much about this in years past for Carolina when it's come to their defensive linemen. They don't have those guys that can consistently do that. A lot of these guys get stuck, by these offensive linemen getting pushed back off the line of scrimmage, really just getting overpowered. Carolina's got to find guys that can hold their own at the line of scrimmage and that can get off of those blocks. And I think that Jackson is certainly one that can do that. Really solid tackler and will make you pay from time to time if he's given the opportunity. So he does lay some hits on some guys, some of those coming downfield, which I think shows his high motor. And that's something we've talked so much about with this group that Carolina's brought in since Bill Belichick has come on as the head coach. Carolina has really been looking for those guys with traits that have the energy that's there at all times. The high motor is something that you cannot teach, but it's something that is almost crucial for guys to be able to have, because when you have that high motor, it allows you to chase down plays and it allows you to make plays. And, when you look at him, the other thing that I really like is that he has plenty of versatility. So as a guy that plays on the interior of the defensive line, this is a guy that does play a little bit of edge rusher. They've even dropped him back on certain plays, and he is able to make plays down the field because of just how athletic he is. Does a good job of getting his hands up, which I think shows that he's a really smart player. That's what you're looking for from guys on the defensive line. If they can't get to the quarterback, what do they do outside of that? He does a good job of getting his hands in the passing lanes and knocking balls down. The biggest thing that he'll have to add to his game along the interior of that defensive line is more physicality, because he doesn't play with that reckless abandon. Now, again, part of that is because of the way that he gets off the line of scrimmage, his suddenness and quickness. That's something that's incredibly difficult for players at the high school level to stay in front of. What's he going to do when you go up against guards and centers that are able to stay in front of that? That's where he has to develop that physical edge. And if he does develop that, then he has a chance to be a great pass rushing defensive tackle. I look at him as more of a 3 technique, maybe even a 5 technique type of player there. That's something that I think they will figure out eventually when he gets on campus. But I think that's the perfect type of guy for Carolina to pair with a guy that we'll talk about here in just a minute in Trayshawn Ruffin. That is more of the run stopper. I think this is the guy that can get after the quarterback. Yes, he is still going to be able to shed blocks and make plays in the running game, which is what you want. But he's more of a guy that's looking to get after the quarterback. And so I think that's what Carolina needs. Is a nice balance between those two types of guys. And I think this is one of the guys that gives that to them. You then move on to his teammate. Both of these guys coming out of Our Lady of Good Counsel in Olney, Maryland. This one, a guy in the 2025 class. Carolina dips back in on the 2025 class one last time, or you would think one last time, as they get 3-star offensive tackle Aiden Buchanan. He announced after a midweek visit to Chapel Hill, so was not on campus with his teammate, who committed actually the day after his visit concluded on that Sunday after the visit on the Saturday. He was there in the middle of the week, and he ends up flipping his commitment from West Virginia to Carolina. Now, when it comes to the flip, this is a guy that, signed with West Virginia back during the early signing period in December. And late last month, he asked for to be released from his athletic scholarship agreement with the Mountaineers, and was, of course, granted that release, as we've seen from a couple of guys that Carolina has picked up in this 2025 class. But this one was one that Carolina, kind of came out of nowhere, but Carolina behind the scenes was secretly doing a good job of recruiting him. You'd imagine that part of it was that they may have stumbled over him when they were looking at David Jackson, and they said, hey, let's take a look at this kid. This is a guy that, turned out to not be so satisfied with his situation there. When he committed at the time, of course, Rich Rodriguez had not taken the head coaching job just yet at West Virginia. And you would imagine that things since that point have changed a little bit, maybe as to what West Virginia is looking for. And so Buchanan, the number 1,376 overall prospect in the 2025 class and the number 99 offensive tackle in the class, he ends up looking for another destination, and Carolina is who he stumbles upon. Now, if you're wondering, how good really is he? Is he a guy that, because of that rating, we should be worried about? First of all, a lot of Carolina's commits in the 2025 class late were somewhere in this range. And there were guys that we really, really liked and guys that we think are going to be very impactful. The other thing that I would tell you about Buchanan, if you are a little bit worried about him, is that this is a guy that was recruited by Michigan. And Michigan, as we know, is a school that has a lot of pride when it comes to recruiting along the offensive line. That they are a group that does not take that position lightly. And the fact that they were trying to push to flip him before he signed with West Virginia back during December, I think shows you that there is some potential here. And that to me is more of a justification than just about anything. When you have a school like that has the history that Michigan has had of producing guys in the trenches, I think it's a really good sign that they were going after him. When it comes to what you're getting in Buchanan, I mean, he is what you would expect him to be at the size that he is. He is 6'8", 310 pounds. And the area that you would expect him to succeed at that size is in the run game, and that is where he succeeds. He's an absolute mauler where he's simply able to overpower edge rushers with a strong upper body strength. Does a really good job, some solid pass protection reps. I really like the way that he moves laterally. I think he does a really good job footwork-wise, especially for someone of his size and especially someone at the high school level where, footwork can be questionable at times. I think all of that stuff is there for him. The biggest concern that you're going to have to deal with him is his size. How will he be able to adjust his pad level to playing against guys that are squattier edge rushers, guys that are going to be able to get low and rush around the outside? I think that's the biggest issue that he's going to have to deal with, is handling some of those shorter guys, some of those quicker guys that are going to make it difficult for him to stay in front of. But I think the thing here is, there is promise, and, he is a guy that I think within the first few years of being on campus could make an impact. But it's also a shot in the dark here. This is a very late ad for Carolina, and it's one that, you're not wasting a scholarship on. It's not one where you're having to push someone out of the program in order to get him in. This is, Carolina with the expanded amount of scholarships that they have, seeing a guy that was unhappy with where he's at and taking a chance on him. And I think, you look at where he ranks, I think that's very solid, especially when you put him up against some of the other guys that Carolina has landed late in this class. I think he fits right into that same mold. And, when I watched him on film, I saw a guy that I like the traits a lot. I just think that, you worry about someone of that size. We've seen it before with Carolina when they've had, taller offensive tackles like that can be a bit of an issue. It's just about him learning how to get his pad level a little lower. And the good news for him is that a lot of those squattier edge rushers, you're not seeing nearly as many of those as you used to see, because those guys are big. You're seeing a lot more 6'4", 6'5" guys, and you like that from an edge rusher because they have a good wingspan. That's the same thing, though, with Buchanan. He's going to be able to cover a lot of ground, and the hope is that, he just doesn't get beat down low with those guys that can overpower him by being the lower man. If he can figure that out, he's got all the traits to be a successful offensive lineman at this level. And, for Carolina, this is a big addition. I don't think people talked about it enough, because I do think that there is a guy that could potentially play offensive tackle at this level in Trey Blue. He played it at the high school level, but most people projected that he was going to move inside. I think, especially if you watch his senior film, there's a chance that he could stay at offensive tackle. But Buchanan is a guy that we know is going to be an offensive tackle. At that size, it's going to be really hard to add the type of weight that you're going to need if you're going to try to play him inside a guard. Also, not really wanting that guy to play at guard because you are supposed to be in a phone booth playing more in the direct line of the quarterback. Having to throw over a 6'8" guy is not necessarily going to be the easiest thing. So you want him to be on the outside at offensive tackle. And Carolina there, depth-wise, is not really in the greatest spot. They did lose a lot of their depth to the transfer portal this offseason, including some guys along the offensive line that started last year. Howard Sampson in the transfer portal at left tackle. And then Trevion Green's going to move inside, it would look like, to play guard, an area that he probably should have been playing from the beginning because he has less, he should have less struggles there than he's having currently as an offensive tackle. I mean, last year led up the most pressures of anybody on the team, led up the most sacks of anybody on the team. And so with all of that and all that the guys that the Tar Heels lost in the transfer portal, yes, they went out and got some guys that can replace them in the portal as well. That's why you saw them hit that position as hard as they did. But you're still wanting someone that is a true freshman in there to build that depth. You still want to be able to recruit from the high school ranks. And that's one thing that Mack Brown did not recruit in this class. He did have 2 offensive linemen that were committed. Both of them ended up signing with the team in December, including Trey Blue, who we mentioned there. But neither one of those guys were tackles. And even when Carolina was going through and adding some guys late, offensive line wasn't really that big of a focus for Carolina. A lot of the focus was on the other side of the trenches, the defensive line. And so Carolina, sort of puts that off, but now they stumble into a guy that has some really nice upside that can potentially help them a few years down the line. Then we move on to the guy that I was talking about a little bit earlier and the big prospect that Carolina landed, the biggest prospect that they've landed maybe, outside of getting the commitment from Bryce Baker, getting him to officially sign with the program when Mack Brown when Bill Belichick first got on campus, that would be Trayshawn Ruffin, the 2026 4-star defensive lineman. Carolina flips his commitment from Texas A&M. Now, he was a guy that was committed to Texas A&M for a while, and really seemed to have a good relationship with the staff over there. But this is a guy that, at his size is going to be able to make an immediate impact for Carolina. 6'3", 330 pounds. And this is a guy that, you look at his stats this year, 34 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 1 quarterback hurry, and 1 fumble recovery in 9 games. It's not going to blow anybody away. You go back to his sophomore season, which was kind of where he sort of broke out and started to jump onto the scene, where he had 52 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, 2 quarterback hurries, and a fumble recovery. I mean, look, it's not the greatest numbers that you're going to see, but this is a guy that I think is going to fit at the college level a lot better than he fits at this level. First of all, there still is a little bit of upside there to him. He's still a little raw in terms of, some of the things that you see him do at the high school level, but he is a guy that is going to be able to clog up the middle of the defensive line for Carolina. That's what you want, a guy that is super athletic, has the size, and, playing at almost 330 pounds, he is very athletic for that size. He can take up 2 gaps, which is something that Carolina really hasn't had somebody be able to do consistently since Aaron Crawford left campus. That's what they're hoping that they're getting in a guy like Trayshawn Ruffin. He's a guy that does a great job, again, like we talked about with David Jackson, of just shedding blockers. He uses his strong upper body to be able to do that, and really is able to throw those guys aside with ease at times and make plays on the ball carrier in the backfield. when he gets to the ball carrier, he will make them pay at times because the way that he just ragdolls guys and throws them around because of his upper body strength, it's impressive. Now, he is going to have to be careful. There are a couple of suplex-looking tackles in there, and we've seen, over the years, especially if you were familiar with the way that Don Chapman tackled for Carolina, during his time in Chapel Hill, got called for multiple personal foul penalties, unnecessary roughness penalties for throwing guys to the ground like that. He's going to have to make sure that he is smart about doing that kind of stuff. But you do like to see a guy that has a little bit of a violent streak to him and does like to make guys pay when he gets to the ball carrier. Again, for his size, really good athleticism, and can cover multiple gaps, which is something that Carolina really needs in the middle of their defense. They were hoping that Travis Shaw was going to be that guy. He had moments where he looked like that this year, but now you're going to have a guy that really can slow down the run game because of just how big he is, how impactful he is, how forceful he is in the middle of that group. And that's something that Carolina will really like to see. He needs to bring his pad level down. That's one thing, a guy that kind of stands straight up out of his stance pretty quickly. But I do think that's something that can be coached pretty easily. And there will be a little bit of a natural learning curve for him. He comes from a level of high school football in the state of North Carolina that's solid, but it's not the top level. And so I do think that's going to be something that he has to adjust to as well. But I do think that this is a guy that has the tools to be a 3 or 4 year contributor for the team along the defensive front and could get to that point where he is a very impactful starter. I mean, he's ranked as the number 195 overall player in the class and the number 24 defensive lineman in the class, according to 24/7 Sports Composite. So this is the big gem for Carolina in this class so far. They've been looking for a guy that is sort of a headliner, and they finally got it because this is a guy that just fits that space eater mentality that Carolina is looking for from their defensive linemen. And when you combine it with a guy like David Jackson, when you combine it with some of the other guys that Carolina brought in this past class, you're starting to see the depth build up there between the two different types of defensive tackles. You're seeing the group that can stop the run, which is the most important thing that Carolina's got to be able to do. That really sets up everything that offenses are able to do against them. But you're also getting those defensive linemen that are able to get after the quarterback and rush the passer. That's what you want to see, is a nice balance of those two. And Ruffin, with his talent, I think really stands out. And you combine it with David Jackson, a guy that I think has plenty of upside. And I think that's going to be a good pairing that you could be seeing eventually starting or at least contributing next to each other in their time here at Carolina. So very interesting. Great job by Bill Belichick and the staff to take advantage of that unofficial visit weekend and turn it into a very successful one, capped off by the flip of one of the most important targets that Carolina has had in the state of North Carolina so far. And that's a big one, man, because Carolina has just one other in-state prospect committed in this class. That would be Zayd Lott, the 3-star quarterback who, Carolina is looking to recruit over. They've been bringing in multiple quarterbacks, including Landon Duckworth, who was a part of that group that visited on March 8th. That is a guy that hails from Jackson High School down there in Jackson, Alabama. He's just one of the guys that Carolina's been looking at and trying to get on campus as they try to bring in another quarterback in this upcoming class. Now, part of that is that Carolina simply just needs depth at the position. You would imagine that whoever doesn't win the starting job between Bryce Baker and Ryan Brown, and it seems like those are the two guys that are going to be battling for it now, there's a good chance that that other guy, after the season is over or potentially even before then, could enter the transfer portal. Max Johnson is there, but this is going to be his last year of eligibility pretty much no matter what. You would imagine, unless there is another sort of setback or something like that. but you would imagine this is going to be his last year. And so then Carolina's 2 other scholarship guys. They do have another scholarship quarterback in Grady Merrill, who was brought in, or Gary Merrill, I believe, who was brought in. Of course, that was a guy that, is a dual sport athlete, plays lacrosse as well. So Carolina could end up losing him to one specific, if he decides to focus on one specific sport. So, there's a lot of different things that Carolina is having to navigate at that quarterback position. That's the reason they're trying to add another recruit there alongside Zayd Lott. But outside of that, there's no other players in the state of North Carolina that are committed to the class. And that was one of the issues that Carolina was having late here under Mack Brown, was that they were starting to miss on a lot of those in-state guys. And I get it, man. You want this program to become national. That's certainly something that there is an interest in at this point. And we've seen Carolina recruiting some of those names nationally. I like that. I want Carolina to go into the states of California, Texas, Alabama, these talent-rich states, and be able to bring out some of the top talent, even states that they've had success in, like Georgia, Florida, Virginia. I like that fact that they are wanting to have a lot of success there in those states and land some of those top prospects. But I do think that one of the things that they have to make sure that they do is take care of the home state. And there is a lot of talent in the state. I think this year really is one of the best years in state for Carolina. And so hopefully this is the start of Carolina being able to bring in some of those in-state recruits alongside of Trayshawn Ruffin, where they, and be able to have the success that we've seen from Mack Brown his first time around. Mack Brown, even early in his second time around, have Butch Davis and Larry Fedora early in his tenure. That was when Carolina was at its best, was when they were recruiting the home state heavily. And so hopefully Bill Belichick and his staff will realize that. A couple other storylines for you guys before we get out of here. Carolina landing official visits with 2 of the running back targets that they have in the class. Messiah Mickens, the most recent one that Carolina landed a visit with out of Harrisburg, PA. He's a guy that is committed to Penn State as of right now, but with the loss of Jawan Sider, their running backs coach, he ended up moving on to Notre Dame. Now his recruitment is open. And while Notre Dame is the biggest challenger right now to Penn State's still firmly in it for an in-state guy. Carolina's that third team that's been there, that's lurking, and they are the only other team besides those 2 that has an official visit scheduled at this point. The interesting thing is it's June 20th through 22nd, which I believe is the last week that you are able to schedule official visits in the month of June. And so I think that Carolina may get the last shot here. Now, you may say, well, that means that you have to get to that visit. That certainly is something. But if they do get to that visit, them getting the last shot, I think is going to be important. And so we'll have to keep monitoring that situation. Meanwhile, Damon Ferguson, they call him Nuttall. He's another guy that Carolina has been on here recently. We've heard his name pop up a few different times. He was one of the guys that was on campus during that week that I talked about. And he too, or he will be taking his official visit as well. Pulled up the wrong one of the 2 of them right there. Pulled up Mickens real quick. So let me just make sure that I have the right one here. He will be on campus in Chapel Hill the weekend of June, actually during the week. He will be in Chapel Hill during the month of June. It'll be June 16th through June 17th. So a midweek visit for him to Carolina. That'll be, important. And he also has visits to Indiana, Duke, Pittsburgh, and does have one other official visit that I did not, unfortunately, include in the article about him. For some reason, I don't have the team name there, so that's interesting. But that'll be on June 12th. But, he is very intrigued about a lot of these different schools. And this is a group, I forget, as I mentioned, forget the other school that was in there. But I do think that this is a very navigatable group for Carolina. I think they are certainly the biggest name out of this group, especially with the fact that they've got the head coach that they've got in Bill Belichick. So I think that is definitely an advantage for Carolina. Now the question is, are they going to be able to take advantage of it? They're going to be one of the last teams that gets a shot here with him. And so, in the end, is that a benefit for them, or does that mean that Carolina, doesn't get to that official visit? I think they do, because as I mentioned, it's Indiana on April 25th. Unless he commits there, then he's going to get to that next group of visits where you have all these consecutively. Duke, May 30th. You have Pittsburgh the weekend of June 5th. Virginia is that other team the weekend of June 12th. And then it will be Carolina. Now, in terms of, who would be the hometown team for him, I guess you would say either Pittsburgh or Virginia are probably the closest. He's a guy that comes from Baltimore at a Milford Mill Academy. So not really looking like there's any teams, as far as we know, Maryland not really involved here. So Carolina, I think, has a legitimate shot at this one if they want it. I think they do for sure want a guy that's ranked inside of the top 400 nationally. And that would be a nice addition to that backfield. So keep an eye on him as a guy that Carolina will be pushing hard for here over these next couple of months as they get prepared to host him for an official visit. Meanwhile, today, the latest news that we have on the recruiting trail, 2026 four-star safety Jamarian Gordon. He has Carolina in his top four. It is Carolina, Florida, Florida State, and Ole Miss. Carolina will be hosting him for an official visit on June 6th. Florida will get the shot before they do on May 30th. And then the weekend of June 12th, that will be the weekend where Ole Miss will host them. As of right now, don't have anything on when Florida State would host them, but that is a team that is looked at as one of the favorites for him, along with Carolina at this point. So both teams, I think, are in a really good spot right now. But you see Carolina going into, the Baltimore area, going into the state of Pennsylvania, and then the last guy, Jamarian Gordon, a guy that hails from the same high school that I told you just a little while ago about, Landon Duckworth, hailing from Jackson High School down there in Alabama. So Carolina going into all these different states to bring these guys in, and let's see if they're able to close the deal with a couple of these guys, or possibly all three, which would be a big boost for their 2026 class, a class that currently right now sits with 8 commitments so far, in a really good shape to this point, and 9 commitments after last night, and now ranks number 22 overall in the 2026 rankings according to 24/7 Sports composite team rankings, and is currently inside of the top 10 in the ACC. I think it's 6th in the ACC right now, if I remember correctly from last night. So what a tremendous job done by Bill Belichick and his staff, at least early on here on this recruiting trail. And while they have just one heavy hitter in Trayshawn Ruffin, that's a 4-star, you would imagine they're going to be adding more here as we move along sometime in the near future. If they do, we'll have you covered on the website, HeelToughBlog.com. We've got you covered with all this stuff. Make sure you go back, read about Trayshawn Ruffin, and even further dive into his film and what we see from him. So make sure that you check that out. Also, we've got the article up there about Jamarian Juice Gordon, as they call him. Make sure you go and read that. And any other news that'll be coming out, I'll be keeping you up to date on that. Any news coming out from around spring practice, I will update you on as well, although we don't know how often we're going to get Bill Belichick meeting with the media. It's probably not going to be all that often. And so whatever we can get, we're going to make sure that we're keeping you guys up to date on it. If we don't get anything, well, then we'll be back sometime here in the near future Of course, Carolina does have the open practice that will be open to the public. Practice like the pros, I believe, is what it was, if I remember correctly. That'll be on April 12th. There is an article on the website up there sort of detailing that for you, talking about how Carolina will not be having their spring game. So make sure you go back, read all the details on that so that you don't miss out on that great event. Meanwhile, on the basketball side of things, we're covering you with everything that's going on with Carolina in the NCAA tournament. They make the field to the ire of many around the country. Does that serve as extra motivation? We're going to find that out tonight. And Josh will have you covered with a preview and recap of every game that Carolina plays in the tournament over there on the website. Me and him on the podcast side of things will have you covered with previews and recaps of every game. As we told you, tomorrow going to be a busy day for the podcast. Carolina, if they win, we will have a recap podcast and a preview podcast later in the night then of Carolina's next opponent, which would be Ole Miss. If they lose, still going to have that recap podcast, and it will probably be more extensive. So make sure that you're keeping an eye out for whichever one of those situations comes up. Keep an eye out for the Four Corners podcast, which will be coming at you fast and furious, hopefully, over the next few days, as hopefully Carolina is able to make a little bit of a run here in the month of March. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening to this edition. And as always, go Tar Heels.